In the Arabian Sea, 380 kilometers from the Horn of Africa, an island rises from water so blue they seem otherworldly. A place where evolution took a different path, where trees bleed crimson resin and limestone plateaus harbor life found nowhere else on Earth. This is Socotra, a 3,600 square kilometer fragment of the ancient supercontinent Gondwana, isolated for 20 million years, shaped by monsoons that rage for half the year and stillness that follows. Here, on one of the planet's most biodiverse islands, nearly 40% of plant species exist only within these limestone mountains and coastal plains, a living laboratory of adaptation, survival, and geological time made visible. Socotra Island emerges from the Indian Ocean like a vision conjured from deep time, a landscape so alien, so profoundly strange, that scientists have called it the most alien-looking place on Earth. Located at the crossroads of ancient trade routes, where the Arabian Sea meets the Gulf of Aden, this Yemeni archipelago represents one of the most isolated and biologically distinct ecosystems on the planet. The main island, Socotra, alongside three smaller islands, Abd al-Khoury, Samha, and Darsa, and several rocky outcrops, forms a chain that separated from mainland Africa during the Miocene epoch, when tectonic forces tore Gondwana apart and scattered its fragments across the globe. The island's isolation has been profound. While the rest of the world evolved and changed, Socotra remained locked in evolutionary stasis, protected by one of nature's most formidable barriers, the summer monsoon. From June through September, winds exceeding 80 kilometers per hour whipped the surrounding seas into mountainous swells, making approach impossible for traditional vessels. For millennia, this seasonal fortress allowed life here to develop in extraordinary directions, producing what UNESCO has recognized as a biodiversity hotspot of global significance, a place where 825 plant species grow, 307 of them endemic, found nowhere else in the universe. The island's topography tells the story of violent geologic birth. The higher mountains dominate the interior, their limestone peaks rising 1,525 meters above sea level at Jabal Skiand, the highest point. These mountains formed from ancient seabeds compressed and thrust upward, their porous rock creating a vast natural aquifer that sustains life even through the driest months. Surrounding the central massif, limestone plateaus stretch toward coasts where turquoise lagoons pool between brilliant white sand dunes and coral reefs that harbor their own endemic species, groupers, butterfly fish, and crabs that exist only in Socotran waters. The climate operates on a binary rhythm. The Khalif, the monsoon season, brings not rain but wind, transforming the island into a place of horizontal violence where nothing moves without resistance. Trees bend permanently eastward, shaped by decades of seasonal gales. Yet when the monsoons cease in October, Socotra enters a period of profound calm, when the seas flatten to mirror-like stillness and temperatures hover between 22 and 30 degrees Celsius. Perfect conditions for the brief winter rains that bring life to dormant seeds scattered across the limestone soil. It is the flora that makes Socotra legendary. The dragon's blood tree, Dracana cinnabari, stands as the island's icon, its umbrella-shaped canopy and thick trunk adapted to capture moisture from fog and rare rains. When its bark is cut, it bleeds deep crimson resin, prized for 4,000 years as medicine, dye, and incense, traded along routes that connected ancient Egypt to Rome to China. Equally remarkable is the desert rose, Adenium obesum socotranum, its swollen trunk storing water like a botanical camel, its pink flowers emerging impossibly from bulbous gray flesh. The cucumber tree, Dendropsychios socotronus, is the only succulent tree in the cucumber family, its bottle-shaped trunk a monument to evolutionary problem-solving in an arid environment. But Socotra's strangeness extends beyond its famous trees. The island hosts caves that plunge hundreds of meters into limestone bedrock, including Hawk Cave, where ancient inscriptions in South Arabic, Greek, and Sanskrit reveal that travelers have sought shelter here for over 2 millennia. Freshwater springs emerge from mountainsides, creating microhabitats where relict species, survivors from wetter epochs, persist in pockets of permanent moisture. Along the coasts, coral reefs demonstrate resilience to warming waters that have bleached ecosystems elsewhere, their adaptive capacity a subject of intense scientific interest. Human habitation here dates back at least 2,000 years, possibly longer. The Socotri people speak a unique language, Socotri, a pre-Islamic South Arabic tongue with no written form, preserved only in oral tradition, songs and poetry passed through generations. Their culture reflects profound isolation. Traditional architecture uses limestone and palm fronds. Navigation follows stars and wind patterns. Fishing employs techniques unchanged since antiquity. Despite centuries of contact with traders, Phoenicians, Greeks, Portuguese, and British, Socotran culture remained distinct, shaped more by the island's ecological constraints than by external influence. Today, Socotra exists at a precarious intersection of preservation and change. Recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2008, the island faces pressures from climate change, overgrazing by imported goats, infrastructure development, and the political instability that has engulfed Yemen since 2015. Yet it remains remarkably intact, a place where evolution's experiments continue, where ancient ways of life persist, and where the deep past remains visible in every twisted tree and limestone cliff. Subscribe to witness more of Earth's most extraordinary and isolated ecosystems.
The Gondwana Fragment, Geological Origins and Deep Time. To understand Socotra is to understand deep time, the vast, almost incomprehensible scales across which continents drift, oceans open, and life radiates into empty niches. 20 million years ago, during the early Miocene epoch, the supercontinent Gondwana was in its final stages of fragmentation. Africa, South America, Antarctica, Australia, and the Indian subcontinent had already begun their slow continental divorce, driven by the relentless convection currents churning beneath Earth's crust. Socotra was part of the African-Arabian landmass, positioned at what would become the junction between the Arabian Sea and the Gulf of Aden. The Gulf of Aden is a spreading center, a place where tectonic plates pull apart, allowing magma to well up and create new oceanic crust. As the Arabian plate separated from the African plate, moving northeastward at approximately 2 centimeters per year, Socotra remained attached to Africa by the thinnest of continental threads. Then, approximately 6 million years ago, the final separation occurred. The island drifted into isolation, surrounded by deepening seas that would serve as an evolutionary moat, preventing the migration of mainland species and forcing the island's flora and fauna to adapt or perish in their enclosed world. The island's foundation is primarily limestone, sedimentary rock formed from the compressed remains of marine organisms that lived in shallow Tethys seawaters between 65 and 35 million years ago. This limestone, known as the Raduma Formation, can be over 800 meters thick in places, a testament to millions of years of biological accumulation. The rock is karstic, porous and riddled with channels carved by slightly acidic rainwater dissolving calcium carbonate over geological time. This creates underground river systems, caves, and natural cisterns that store precious water during the 8-month dry season. The Hagir Mountains that dominate Socotra's interior are a geological anomaly.
Unlike typical volcanic islands formed by hotspot activity, like Hawaii or the Galapagos, Socotra's mountains are composed entirely of uplifted sedimentary rock. Tectonic compression thrusts these ancient seabeds skyward, creating a landscape of sharp ridges, vertical cliffs, and plateaus that expose layer upon layer of geological history. At the highest elevations, outcrops of Precambrian basement rock over 600 million years old pierce through the limestone, offering glimpses of Earth's deep past from a time before complex life colonized the land. The coastal plains tell a different story. Here, quaternary deposits, sediments less than 2.6 million years old, spread in aprons of sand, gravel, and coral debris. These plains were shaped by sea level fluctuations during glacial cycles, when global ice sheets locked away vast quantities of water, exposing continental shelves and allowing terrestrial ecosystems to expand. During these periods, Socotra's land area increased substantially, and land bridges may have briefly connected the island to nearby Abd al-Khoury, allowing limited species exchange before rising seas severed the connection once more. Socotra's climate during the Miocene was likely more humid than today, supporting lush forests across much of the island. Evidence from paleobotanical studies suggests that dragon's blood trees and other endemic species evolved during this wetter period, adapting to capture and conserve moisture as the climate gradually became more arid. The monsoon system that now dominates Socotra's weather patterns established itself approximately 8 million years ago, when the uplift of the Tibetan Plateau altered global atmospheric circulation. This created the intense seasonal wind reversals that characterize the Indian Ocean monsoon, winds that would prove decisive in shaping not just Socotra's ecology, but its entire relationship with human civilization. The island's caves represent some of its most dramatic geological features. Hook Cave, located on the northeastern plateau at an elevation of 250 meters, extends for approximately 3 kilometers into the limestone bedrock. Its chambers, some reaching heights of 30 meters, are adorned with stalactites and stalagmites formed by the patient drip of mineral-laden water over tens of thousands of years. The cave maintains a constant temperature of around 25 degrees Celsius and relatively high humidity, creating a microclimate that has preserved ancient inscriptions left by sailors and travelers dating back to the 1st century BCE. These inscriptions, written in Ge'ez, Greek, Sanskrit, South Arabian, and other languages, reveal that Hook Cave served as a pilgrimage site or place of shelter for diverse peoples. The presence of Sanskrit inscriptions from Indian Ocean traders demonstrates the extent of ancient maritime networks and suggests that Socotra's strategic position made it a landmark for navigation long before modern GPS. The cave's ecology is equally remarkable, hosting endemic species of bats, spiders, and invertebrates that have adapted to permanent darkness, their eyes reduced or absent, their other senses heightened to navigate the subterranean world. Beyond Hook, dozens of other caves puncture Socotra's limestone plateaus. Dagub Cave, Geneva Cave, and countless unnamed caverns create a hidden landscape beneath the visible surface. Reservoirs of water, archives of climatic history preserved in speleothems, and refugia for species unable to tolerate the harsh conditions above ground. These caves formed through the slow chemical weathering of limestone, a process that continues today as slightly acidic rainwater percolates through the rock, gradually expanding voids and channels in a process measured across millennia. The island's soil is thin and poor in organic matter, a consequence of limited vegetation and the erosive power of monsoon winds. What soil exists is typically alkaline, derived from weathered limestone, and supports only plants adapted to nutrient scarcity. In the mountains, pockets of deeper soil accumulate in depressions and valleys, where decomposing plant matter gradually builds fertility. These areas support denser vegetation and serve as critical water catchment zones, feeding springs that emerge lower on the slopes. Socotra's isolation has made it a natural laboratory for studying evolution in action. The concept of island biogeography, pioneered by ecologists Robert MacArthur and Elwy Olson, predicts that isolated islands will have fewer species than mainland areas of comparable size, but that those species will often exhibit high levels of endemism. Socotra confirms this pattern dramatically. While the total number of plant species is relatively modest compared to tropical mainland regions, the proportion of endemic species, 37%, ranks among the highest of any island ecosystem on Earth. The island's geological stability over millions of years has been crucial to this endemism. Unlike volcanic islands that regularly experience devastating eruptions or islands affected by glaciation, Socotra has remained relatively unchanged, providing continuous habitat for lineages that evolved here and nowhere else. This stability allowed evolutionary experiments to persist and diversify, producing the extraordinary botanical diversity visible today, a living museum of plant evolution, where ancient lineages demonstrate solutions to survival that have long since disappeared elsewhere.
The Dragon's Blood Forest, Botanical Wonders and Endemic Flora. The Dragon's Blood tree stands like a monument from another world. Dracaena cinnabari, its scientific name derived from the Greek word for female dragon and the Latin for cinnabar, the mercury ore that shares its crimson color, grows in scattered groves across Socotra's limestone plateaus, particularly in the Dixon Plateau and the Fermihan region. The tree's form is unmistakable. A thick, cylindrical trunk rises from the rocky ground, then branches symmetrically into a dense, umbrella-shaped canopy that from a distance resembles a mushroom cap hovering impossibly above the barren landscape. This distinctive shape is an adaptation to Socotra's challenging climate. The densely packed canopy shades the ground beneath, reducing evaporation and creating a microclimate several degrees cooler than the surrounding environment. During the brief winter rains and the frequent morning fogs that roll in from the sea, water condenses on the leaves and drips to the root zone, a form of moisture harvesting that allows the tree to survive 8 months of virtually no precipitation. The canopy shape also provides wind resistance. Rather than presenting a large profile to the monsoon gales, the aerodynamic dome allows air to flow over and around it, reducing the mechanical stress that would topple more conventional tree forms. The Dragon's Blood tree's most famous feature is its resin. When the bark is cut or damaged, the tree exudes a thick, blood-red sap that hardens upon exposure to air. This resin has been harvested and traded for at least 4,000 years, prized by ancient civilizations for its supposed medicinal properties and its use as a dye and varnish. The ancient Egyptians used it in embalming processes, Roman physicians prescribed it for various ailments, medieval European painters valued it as a pigment, Chinese medicine incorporated it as a treatment for blood circulation disorders. Modern chemical analysis has revealed that dragon's blood resin contains a complex mixture of compounds, including flavonoids, saponins, and phenolic compounds with genuine antimicrobial and antioxidant properties. Traditional Socotri medicine uses the resin to treat wounds, stomach ulcers, and respiratory ailments, applications that folk knowledge has maintained for centuries and that scientific research is now beginning to validate. The resin also serves the tree itself, acting as a natural sealant that protects wounds from infection by bacteria and fungi, and possibly deterring herbivores with its astringent, bitter taste. The Dragon's Blood forest is not a dense woodland, but rather a scattered assemblage of individual trees and small groves, each tree claiming territory in the competition for scarce water and nutrients. Estimates suggest that approximately 40,000 mature dragon's blood trees remain on Socotra, a number that has declined significantly over the past century due to overgrazing, climate change, and poor regeneration rates. Beneath many mature trees, few saplings survive. They are browsed by goats, stressed by increasingly erratic rainfall, or fail to establish in soil that has been compacted by livestock. The tree's reproductive strategy reflects its environment. Rather than producing vast quantities of lightweight seeds that disperse on the wind, Dracaena cinnabari produces orange-red berries containing 1 to 3 seeds.
These berries are eaten by birds and the endemic Socotra starling, which then disperse the seeds through their droppings. However, this dispersal mechanism is vulnerable. If bird populations decline, or if the seeds land in unsuitable locations, too dry, too exposed, or degraded by overgrazing, they fail to germinate. The dragon's blood tree's slow growth rate, estimated at 1 centimeter per year in trunk diameter, means that population recovery takes centuries, not decades. Accompanying the dragon's blood trees across Socotra's plateaus is an equally bizarre cast of botanical oddities. The desert rose, Adenium obesum socotranum, represents the Socotran subspecies of a plant found across arid regions of Africa and Arabia, but here it has evolved into a grotesque extreme. The trunk swells into a bulbous water-storing caudex that can exceed 2 meters in diameter, giving the plant the appearance of a melted candle or a twisted sculpture. This massive water reservoir allows the desert rose to survive months without rain, drawing on stored moisture to produce its showy pink flowers that bloom spectacularly after winter rains. The cucumber tree, Dendrosicyos socotranus, is perhaps even stranger. It is the only tree in the Cucurbitaceae family, the family that includes cucumbers, melons, and gourds, and it has evolved from herbaceous vine ancestors into a tree form found nowhere else. Its trunk is bottle-shaped, thick, and succulent, storing water in spongy tissue. The tree can reach 8 meters in height, its branches spreading in irregular patterns, its small leaves emerging briefly during favorable conditions before dropping to conserve water. The cucumber tree produces small, inedible gourds that split open to reveal seeds embedded in papery tissue dispersed by wind across the rocky plateaus. Dorstenia gigas, another Socotran endemic, resembles a thick-trunked palm, but belongs to the mulberry family. Its swollen trunk, covered in peeling papery bark, rises to a crown of large, palmate leaves. The plant's flowers are tiny and arranged in disc-shaped structures called hypanthodia, which ripen into aggregate fruits. Dorstenia gigas grows primarily in limestone crevices and cliff faces where its roots penetrate deep into rock fissures to access water. During drought, it sheds its leaves and enters dormancy, appearing dead until the return of favorable conditions triggers rapid regrowth. The Hagir Mountains harbor a different botanical community, one adapted to higher elevation, cooler temperatures, and slightly more reliable moisture. Here, Croton socotranus forms dense thickets, its aromatic leaves releasing volatile oils that may deter herbivores. The endemic pomegranate, Punica protopunica, represents a relic species that predates the common pomegranate cultivated worldwide, a living fossil that offers insights into the evolution of domesticated fruits. Its pink flowers and small, intensely flavored fruits are gathered by Socotri herders who know the precise locations of trees passed down through generations. Socotra's endemic flora extends far beyond its famous trees. The island hosts 25 endemic species of succulent plants in the genus Aloe, including Aloe perry, which produces a high-quality medicinal aloe harvested and exported since ancient times. There are endemic euphorbias, echeverias, and sedums, each representing evolutionary solutions to the fundamental challenge of surviving in an environment where water is scarce, soils are poor, and the wind never truly stops. The island's endemic plants demonstrate convergent evolution, the phenomenon where unrelated species evolve similar adaptations in response to similar environmental pressures. Succulence, the storage of water in swollen stems or leaves, appears in multiple plant families on Socotra. Reduced leaf size, deep tap roots, waxy cuticles, and deciduousness during drought are strategies repeated across the endemic flora, evidence that natural selection has pushed diverse lineages towards similar solutions. Some of Socotra's plants are living fossils, species with ancient lineages that have survived largely unchanged for millions of years because their island refuge protected them from competition with more recently evolved mainland species. The dragon's blood tree belongs to a genus, Dracaena, with a fossil record extending back to the Cretaceous period over 65 million years ago. Its Socotran form may represent the last survivor of a group that once had a much wider distribution across the ancient Tethys Sea region before climate change and continental drift reduced it to this single island stronghold.
Yet this botanical wonderland is increasingly fragile. Climate models project that Socotra will become hotter and drier over the next decades, with more erratic rainfall patterns and potentially stronger monsoons. The dragon's blood forest, already showing signs of stress, may contract to ever smaller refugia in the mountains, where fog and slightly cooler temperatures provide marginal advantages. Without successful regeneration, the iconic groves could decline to scattered remnant trees within a century, leaving only mature specimens slowly dying without replacement, a living extinction unfolding across decades.
Wings, scales, and chitin, the fauna of isolation. Socotra's fauna, while less celebrated than its flora, is equally remarkable in its distinctiveness. The island hosts approximately 90% endemic land snail species, 37 endemic reptile species, and 6 endemic bird species, proportions that rival or exceed those of famous isolated ecosystems like the Galapagos Islands. What Socotra lacks in large mammals, there are no native terrestrial mammals larger than bats. It compensates for in the extraordinary diversity and specialization of its smaller creatures. The island's bird fauna demonstrates how isolation drives evolutionary divergence. The Socotra starling, Onychnathus frater, is found nowhere else on Earth. With its glossy black plumage tinged with iridescent blue, this corvet-like bird is a conspicuous presence in the dragon's blood forests and coastal plains. It feeds on fruits, particularly the berries of dragon's blood trees and the endemic ziziphus shrubs, playing a crucial role as a seed disperser. Pairs mate for life and nest in cliff cavities, where the female lays 3 to 4 eggs that both parents incubate and feed. The Socotra sunbird, Chalcometra balfouri, named after the Scottish botanist Isaac Bailey Balfour, who led an expedition to the island in 1880, is another endemic jewel. Males display brilliant metallic plumage, deep emerald green on the throat and chest, contrasting with black wings and tail. They dart among flowering plants, probing tubular flowers with curved bills adapted to extract nectar. Their high-pitched jingling calls ring across the mountainsides, particularly during the breeding season when males perform elaborate aerial displays to attract females. The Socotra sparrow, Socotra warbler, Socotra cisticola, and Socotra bunting complete the roster of endemic passerines. Each occupies distinct ecological niches. The warbler favors dense scrub in the mountains, the cisticola inhabits grasslands and coastal plains, while the bunting prefers rocky habitats where it feeds on seeds and insects. These birds represent independent evolutionary trajectories that diverged from mainland ancestors millions of years ago, adapting to Socotra's specific conditions through natural selection across countless generations. Socotra is also critical habitat for seabirds. The island's cliffs and offshore rocks provide nesting sites for thousands of breeding pairs of sooty falcons, Cory shearwaters, and several species of terns. The sooty falcon is particularly notable. This elegant raptor breeds on Socotra and other islands in the western Indian Ocean, then undertakes an extraordinary migration to Madagascar and East Africa, timing its breeding season to coincide with the autumn migration of small birds that provide abundant food for its chicks. Reptiles dominate Socotra's terrestrial vertebrate fauna. The island hosts 29 species of reptiles, 23 of which are endemic. Among the most striking is the Socotra leaf-toed gecko, Hamadrocon rybecki, a nocturnal species that hunts insects across limestone rocks and the bark of trees. Its large eyes, equipped with vertical pupils, provide exceptional night vision. Adhesive pads on its toes allow it to cling to seemingly smooth surfaces, a result of millions of microscopic hair-like structures that exploit van der Waals forces, the weak molecular attractions that become significant at microscopic scales. The Socotra rock gecko, Prostura socotranus, occupies sunlit rock faces where it basks to regulate temperature before hunting.
Unlike most geckos, which are nocturnal, this species is active during the day, an adaptation that reduces competition with nighttime hunters. Its cryptic coloration, mottled browns and grays, provides camouflage against the limestone substrate, making it nearly invisible when motionless. Socotra's lizards include multiple endemic species of skinks, smooth-scaled reptiles that occupy diverse habitats from sea level to the highest peaks. The Hagir mountain skink, Trachelepis socotrona, is particularly abundant in rocky crevices where it hunts small invertebrates. Female skinks give birth to live young rather than laying eggs, an adaptation that may protect developing embryos from temperature extremes and predation. This viviparity appears repeatedly in lizard lineages that colonize challenging environments, suggesting it provides significant evolutionary advantages. The island's invertebrate fauna is staggering in its diversity and endemism. Approximately 90% of Socotra's 700-plus land snail species are found nowhere else on Earth, representing an extraordinary radiation of forms adapted to specific microhabitats. Some species live only in particular caves, others only on certain mountain slopes, others only in coastal vegetation. Each population isolated not just from mainland snails, but from neighboring populations on the same island, allowing genetic drift and local adaptation to produce distinct species across tiny geographic scales. Many of these snails are tiny, barely visible to the naked eye, and have evolved elaborate shell sculptures, colors, and shapes. Some have shells that spiral left instead of right, others have shells so thin they're nearly transparent. Still others have developed spines or ridges that may deter predators or help anchor the snail against rock faces during violent minns. The study of Socotra's land snails has provided insights into speciation processes, demonstrating how geographic isolation combined with natural selection can generate extraordinary diversity from common ancestors. Socotra's spider fauna includes over 200 species, with new species discovered regularly as researchers explore remote regions. Many are endemic, evolved to hunt the island's unique insect fauna. The cave-dwelling spiders have evolved reduced eyes or complete blindness, relying instead on vibrations and chemical cues to detect prey in the perpetual darkness of underground chambers. Surface spiders display adaptations to the harsh environment. Some species construct burrows sealed with trapdoors to escape the heat. Others weave webs reinforced to withstand monsoon winds. The insect fauna demonstrates similar patterns of endemism and specialization. Beetles adapted to feed exclusively on dragon's blood tree leaves, butterflies that pollinate only endemic flowering plants, and ants that have formed obligate relationships with specific plant species. Each represents an evolutionary partnership honed over millennia of isolation. Some of these insects serve as pollinators for plants that would otherwise fail to reproduce, making them keystone species whose disappearance would cascade through the ecosystem. Perhaps most surprisingly, Socotra hosts several endemic species of freshwater crabs in the genus Socotropomon. These crabs inhabit mountain streams and springs, occupying the limited permanent water sources scattered across the island. They are descended from marine ancestors that adapted to freshwater habitats, likely trapped in streams when sea levels fell during glacial periods. Their presence demonstrates that even freshwater species can colonize oceanic islands if conditions permit, although the mechanisms remain subjects of scientific debate. The island's bat fauna includes several species that roast in caves during the day and emerge at dusk to hunt insects. Bats are the only native terrestrial mammals on Socotra, having reached the island through flight, a dispersal mechanism unavailable to non-flying mammals. The bats play important roles as insect predators and, for fruit-eating species, as seed dispersers. Their guano accumulates in cave floors, creating nutrient-rich deposits that support specialized cave ecosystems of fungi, bacteria, and invertebrates adapted to exploit this concentrated food source. Marine fauna around Socotra is equally distinctive. The coral reefs harbor over 250 species of reef-building corals and more than 730 species of fish, including several endemic species found only in Socotran waters. The reefs demonstrate unusual resilience to warming temperatures that have caused massive bleaching events elsewhere in the Indian Ocean.
Scientists hypothesize that Socotra's corals may have adapted to the extreme temperature fluctuations caused by monsoon-driven upwelling, which brings cold, nutrient-rich water from the depths, followed by warm surface water during calm seasons. This repeated exposure to thermal stress may have selected for thermal tolerance, making Socotran reefs potential reservoirs of heat-resistant coral genes valuable for reef restoration efforts worldwide. Large marine fauna frequent Socotran waters. Whale sharks, the largest fish in the ocean, visit seasonally to feed on plankton blooms triggered by monsoon upwelling. Manta rays glide through coastal waters, their enormous wingspan and gentle filter feeding creating underwater spectacles. Dolphins, several species including spinner, bottlenose, and Indo-Pacific humpback dolphins, are regularly sighted, and humpback whales pass through during their migrations between breeding grounds and feeding areas. Seabirds nest on Socotra's beaches, though in declining numbers. Green turtles and hawksbill turtles lay their eggs in the sand during calm seasons, returning to the same beaches where they themselves hatched decades ago. However, coastal development, artificial lighting that confuses hatchlings, and the collection of eggs for food have reduced nesting populations. Conservation efforts now focus on protecting critical nesting beaches and working with local communities to reduce pressure on turtle populations. Join us as we uncover more of nature's isolated laboratories where evolution writes stories found nowhere else on Earth.
The Socotri people, language, culture, and ancient ways. The human history of Socotra extends back at least 2 millennia, possibly longer, though the archaeological record remains incomplete due to limited systematic excavation. The Socotri people, the island's indigenous inhabitants, speak Socotri, a modern South Arabian language that belongs to the Semitic language family, but predates the arrival of Arabic. Socotri is not a dialect of Arabic, but rather a sister language that diverged from common ancestors thousands of years ago, preserving linguistic features that have disappeared from other Semitic languages. Socotri has no standardized written form. It exists purely as an oral language, transmitted through speech, songs, poetry, and stories passed from generation to generation. This oral tradition has preserved ancient knowledge, names for endemic plants and their medicinal uses, navigation techniques based on stars and sea conditions, weather prediction methods drawn from observation of wind patterns and animal behavior, and genealogies that trace family lineages back centuries. Elders serve as living libraries, repositories of cultural knowledge that younger generations must memorize and carry forward. The language itself reflects Socotra's isolation. Socotri contains words for plants, animals, and landscape features that exist nowhere else, terms that cannot be directly translated into Arabic or English, because they describe uniquely Socotran phenomena. There are different words for the wind depending on its direction, strength, and season. There are names for specific developmental stages of dragon's blood trees, distinct terms for various methods of preparing fish, and elaborate vocabularies for kinship relationships that map the complex social structures of clan-based society. Linguists consider Socotri critically endangered. Younger generations increasingly speak Arabic as their primary language, learning it through formal education, television, and contact with mainland Yemen. The isolation that preserved Socotri for millennia is breaking down with improved transportation and communication technologies. UNESCO has classified Socotri as endangered, warning that without active preservation efforts, the language could disappear within 2 or 3 generations, taking with it irreplaceable knowledge systems encoded in its vocabulary and grammar. Traditional Socotri culture is deeply connected to the island's ecology. Pastoralism, the herding of goats, sheep, and cattle, forms the economic foundation for many families. Herders move their animals seasonally between coastal lowlands and mountain pastures following the availability of forage.
During the monsoon season, when coastal areas become inhospitable, families move to highland caves and stone shelters where they've taken refuge for centuries. These seasonal migrations follow routes established over generations, connecting specific families to specific territories through customary rights that predate any formal land tenure system. Fishing provides crucial protein for coastal communities. Traditional boats called houries, constructed from bundles of palm fronds bound tightly together and sealed with the resin of endemic trees, are light enough to be carried by 2 men but sturdy enough to handle coastal waters. These boats have been used on Socotra for centuries. They're designed perfectly adapted to the island's conditions. They require no nails or hardware, can be easily repaired with local materials, and their shallow draft allows navigation in lagoons and reef passages inaccessible to deeper-hulled vessels. Socotri fishermen employ traditional techniques that demonstrate intimate knowledge of marine ecology. They know the seasonal movements of fish species, the locations of underwater springs where fish congregate, and the tidal patterns that expose productive fishing grounds. Hand lines, simple nets and fish traps woven from palm fronds, harvest species like grouper, emperor fish, and tuna without the industrial efficiency and ecological damage of modern commercial fishing. This subsistence fishing has occurred for millennia without collapsing fish stocks, suggesting it operates within sustainable limits. The collection of frankincense and dragon's blood resin has been practiced on Socotra since antiquity. Harvesters make precise cuts in the bark of dragon's blood trees, collecting the exuded resin after it hardens. This skill requires knowledge of which trees can sustain harvesting, when to harvest, and how deep to cut without killing the tree. Expertise developed through trial, error, and observation across countless generations. The resin is then sold to traders, providing cash income for families that otherwise operate largely outside the monetary economy. Traditional Socotri architecture reflects both material constraints and climatic adaptation. Houses in the interior are built from limestone blocks quarried locally. Their thick walls provide thermal mass that moderates daily temperature swings. Roofs are constructed from palm fronds laid over wooden beams, creating insulation while allowing ventilation. In coastal areas, houses are more temporary, built from palm frond walls that can be disassembled and moved. Windows are small to reduce heat gain, and houses are often oriented to catch breezes while blocking the most intense sunlight. Caves have served as seasonal dwellings for centuries. During the monsoon, when stone houses in exposed locations become untenable, families move to large caves that provide natural shelter. These caves are often improved with stone walls to partition living spaces, platforms for sleeping, and sometimes whitewashed walls. Evidence of long habitation appears in smoke-blackened ceilings from cooking fires, worn rock floors, and occasionally ancient inscriptions or paintings left by previous inhabitants. Socotri society is organized around clan structures, extended family groups that trace descent through male lineages. These clans hold customary rights to specific territories, including grazing areas, fishing grounds, and freshwater sources. Disputes between clans are traditionally mediated by councils of elders who apply customary law based on precedent and community consensus rather than written legal codes. This system has maintained social order for centuries, adapting to changing circumstances while preserving core values of collective responsibility and reciprocal obligation. Gender roles in traditional Socotri society are defined but not rigidly fixed. Women manage household production, including the processing of milk into clarified butter and cheese, the collection of water from springs, and the preparation of food. They also gather wild plants for food and medicine, knowledge passed through female lineages. Men focus on herding, fishing, and resin collection. However, these divisions blur in practice. Women may tend animals, men cook, and both genders participate in agricultural labor during planting and harvest. Marriage traditionally involved elaborate negotiations between families, with bride price paid in livestock. Polygamy is permitted under Islamic law and occasionally practiced, though economic constraints make it uncommon. Supporting multiple wives requires substantial resources. Extended families often live in close proximity, with grandparents, parents, children, and sometimes married siblings sharing compounds.
This arrangement facilitates childcare, elder care, and the transmission of knowledge across generations. Music and poetry hold central places in Socotri culture. Traditional songs, sung in Socotri language, accompany weddings, religious celebrations, and social gatherings. These songs preserve historical accounts, genealogies, and moral teachings. Instrumental music features simple drums made from goat skin stretched over wooden frames, and sometimes flutes carved from plant stems. The poetry employs complex metrical patterns and extensive use of metaphor, comparing human experiences to natural phenomena. A beloved person might be likened to rain after drought, a difficult situation to the monsoon wind. Islam arrived in Socotra centuries ago, likely through contact with Arab traders and sailors. The island's inhabitants practice Sunni Islam, though their observance incorporates elements that predate Islam or developed in isolation from mainstream Islamic practice. Small mosques, often simple structures with thatched roofs, serve as community gathering places. Religious education traditionally occurred informally, with elders teaching children Quranic verses and Islamic principles, though formal madrasas have become more common in recent decades. Despite this Islamic identity, some scholars have noted survivals of pre-Islamic beliefs and practices in Socotri culture. The veneration of certain trees and natural features, the attribution of spiritual power to specific locations, and some healing practices suggest older religious traditions that have been syncretized with Islam rather than completely replaced by them. These elements are not publicly emphasized, but they persist in folk beliefs and practices, particularly in remote mountain communities. Traditional medicine on Socotra draws from the island's unique flora. Practitioners, usually elder women, maintain knowledge of which plants treat which ailments. Dragon's blood resin is applied to wounds and taken internally for stomach problems. The leaves of endemic aloes are used to treat skin conditions and burns. Various other plants provide remedies for fever, respiratory infections, digestive complaints, and reproductive health issues. This pharmacopoeia represents empirical experimentation accumulated over centuries, though it's never been systematically cataloged or subjected to scientific validation.
The 20th century brought significant changes to Socotri life. During British colonial control over Aden and Socotra, 1886 to 1967, the island remained largely neglected, a remote outpost of marginal strategic importance. The British built a meteorological station and maintained a small administrative presence, but otherwise left the island's social structures intact. After Yemeni independence, Socotra was incorporated into the newly unified state, though its isolation meant that government presence remained minimal. The socialist period in South Yemen, 1967 to 1990, brought some modernization: a basic road network, a small airstrip, electricity in the capital Hadibo, and the introduction of formal education. However, Socotra remained peripheral to the mainland's concerns, receiving little investment or attention. This benign neglect, while limiting development, also protected the island from more disruptive changes that might have occurred with intensive development. Since Yemen's reunification in 1990, and especially after Socotra's designation as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2008, the island has experienced accelerating change. Tourism has grown, bringing both economic opportunities and cultural stresses. Younger Socotris increasingly migrate to the mainland for education and employment, weakening traditional social structures. Imported goods, from food to consumer electronics, flow into the island, altering consumption patterns and economic relationships. Yet traditional knowledge persists. Herders still read weather patterns in the behavior of birds and the color of the sky at dawn. Fishermen still navigate by stars and interpret ocean currents through changes in watercolor and temperature. Elders still recite genealogies connecting present families to ancestors who lived centuries ago. This knowledge remains functionally important. Those who understand traditional ecological knowledge make better herding and fishing decisions than those who rely solely on modern technologies that can fail or become unavailable.
Monsoon and myth, climate, legends, and the unexplained. Socotra's climate operates on a rhythm as old as the Himalayan uplift. The summer monsoon, locally called the Kharif, transforms the island from June through September. Winds generated by differential heating between the Asian landmass and the Indian Ocean roar across Socotra at sustained speeds of 60 to 80 kilometers per hour, with gusts exceeding 100. The sea becomes impassable, waves reaching 4 to 6 meters in height. Boats cannot launch, supply ships cannot dock. For 4 months, Socotra is effectively cut off from the world, accessible only by the most determined aircraft willing to navigate fierce crosswinds. This annual isolation shaped human history on the island. For millennia, sailors timed their visits to the calm periods between October and May, when monsoon winds reversed direction and seas settled into relative tranquility. Ancient maritime trade routes adjusted their schedules around the monsoon, and Socotra became a waypoint, a place to stop for water, shelter, and provisions during the favorable sailing season before the monsoon made approach impossible. The Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, a 1st century CE Greek shipping manual, mentions Socotra as an island producing high-quality aloe and dragon's blood resin, noting that it was inhabited by Arabs, Indians, and Greeks who came to trade. The text describes the timing of favorable winds and warns of the dangers of approaching during the wrong season. This document confirms that Socotra's monsoon-imposed isolation was understood and factored into ancient navigation, and that the island served as a crossroads for diverse peoples drawn by its valuable trade goods. The winter monsoon brings a different character. From November through February, winds reverse, blowing from the northeast at gentler speeds. These months also bring Socotra's limited rainfall, typically between 150 and 250 millimeters per year in the lowlands, increasing to 400 millimeters in the mountains. This precipitation, though modest by tropical standards, is critical for the island's ecology. Seeds that have lain dormant through the dry season germinate within days of the first rains. Annual plants complete their entire life cycle in the brief window of moisture. Perennial plants produce new leaves, flowers, and fruits. The transition periods between monsoons, March through May, and October through November, are times of relative calm. Temperatures are moderate, winds are light, and the sea is navigable. These are the optimal months for visiting Socotra, when the landscape is still green from winter rains, but the extreme conditions have not yet returned. It is during these periods that most tourism occurs, that supply ships arrive with goods from the mainland, and that the island reconnects with the outside world. Socotra's climate has not always followed its present pattern. Paleoclimatic evidence from cave deposits, lake sediments, and marine cores suggests that the island experienced periods of significantly higher rainfall during wetter phases of the Pleistocene epoch. During these humid periods, which corresponded to glacial maxima when global climate patterns shifted, Socotra may have supported extensive forests rather than the arid scrublands and semi-desert that dominate today. The dragon's blood trees and other endemic plants are likely relics of these wetter times, adapted to capture every possible drop of moisture in an environment that has become progressively more arid. The island's weather patterns create unusual atmospheric phenomena. Morning fogs are common in the mountains, formed when moist air from the sea encounters the cooler temperatures at higher elevations. These fogs can be dense enough to reduce visibility to a few meters, and they provide crucial moisture to plants adapted to capture it. Lichen, moss, and epiphytic plants, species that grow on other plants rather than in soil, depend almost entirely on fog for their water supply. Without these morning fogs, large portions of the mountain flora would perish. Dust storms occasionally sweep across Socotra when desert winds from the Arabian Peninsula or Somalia carry fine sand particles across the Gulf of Aden. These storms can reduce visibility dramatically and deposit a layer of reddish dust across the landscape.
While generally not dangerous, they make travel difficult and can damage sensitive equipment. For desert-adapted plants, however, this dust may provide a source of mineral nutrients leached from continental soils and deposited on the nutrient-poor limestone. Lightning is rare on Socotra due to the generally stable atmospheric conditions, but when thunderstorms do develop, they can be intense. The electrical discharges are spectacular against the island's dark skies, and the sudden downpours can cause flash floods in normally dry wadis, seasonal watercourses that flow only after heavy rain. These floods, while brief, are powerful enough to move boulders and reshape channels, demonstrating the erosive force of water even in an arid environment. Socotri culture is rich with legends that encode observations about the natural world. Stories explain the origin of the dragon's blood tree through various mythic narratives. Some say it grew from the blood of dragons killed in ancient battles. Others claim it sprouted from the blood of two brothers who fought to the death. Still others attribute it to the blood of a dragon and an elephant locked in mortal combat. These myths, while fantastical, preserve the observation that the tree's resin is blood red and flows when the bark is wounded, a property that clearly impressed ancient peoples enough to generate elaborate explanatory stories. Local legends speak of jinn, spirits that inhabit remote caves, mountaintops, and particularly ancient trees. These spirits are said to protect certain locations, bringing misfortune to those who disrespect sacred sites or harm protected trees. Whether these beliefs reflect pre-Islamic animist traditions or were incorporated into Islamic cosmology, they have served a practical conservation function. Certain trees and locations are left undisturbed out of fear of spiritual consequences, effectively creating informal protected areas maintained by cultural taboo rather than legal statute. Stories of mysterious underground cities appear in Socotri folklore, vast chambers beneath the limestone plateaus where ancient people supposedly stored treasures or took refuge during times of catastrophe. While these tales likely exaggerate the extent of the cave systems, they are grounded in reality. Socotra does have extensive karst cave networks, many unexplored, and some genuinely large enough to host considerable numbers of people. The inscriptions in Hook Cave demonstrate that caves have served as refuges and possibly ritual sites for millennia. Fishermen tell of encounters with unusual marine creatures, descriptions that sometimes match known species like whale sharks or giant squid, but other times describe animals that don't correspond to any cataloged species. The Indian Ocean remains incompletely surveyed, and new species of large marine animals continue to be discovered, so the possibility of unknown fauna cannot be dismissed. The Periplus and other ancient texts mention that Socotra was once called the Island of Bliss, or Dioscorida, possibly derived from the Sanskrit name for the island, suggesting very ancient connections with Indian Ocean trade networks. Some scholars have speculated that Socotra might be associated with the mythical land of Punt, the mysterious source of incense mentioned in ancient Egyptian texts. While direct evidence is lacking, the island's production of frankincense and dragon's blood resin, combined with its position along ancient maritime routes, makes it a plausible candidate for at least some of the sources that supplied Egyptian temples with aromatic resins. Unexplained archaeological features dot the island. Scattered across various locations are stone structures whose original purpose remains unclear. Circular stone platforms, cairns marking unknown boundaries or graves, and rock alignments that may have had astronomical, religious, or practical functions. Without systematic excavation and dating, these features remain enigmatic. Evidence of human activity whose context has been lost as oral traditions fade and successive generations reinterpret or forget the meanings attributed by their ancestors. The caves hold their own mysteries. Beyond the famous inscriptions in Hoke Cave, other caves contain rock art, simple geometric patterns, handprints, and occasionally more elaborate designs whose age and cultural attribution remain uncertain. Are these recent additions, or could some date back millennia? Without methods like carbon dating or stylistic analysis comparing them to dated rock art elsewhere, these questions remain open, adding to the sense that Socotra holds secrets not yet fully revealed. Climate change is now writing a new chapter in Socotra's environmental story. Over the past several decades, weather patterns have become more erratic. Droughts last longer. When rains come, they sometimes arrive as intense downpours rather than gentle, sustained precipitation. The monsoon winds may be intensifying, a phenomenon predicted by climate models that showed tropical cyclones becoming stronger as ocean temperatures rise. Sea surface temperatures around Socotra have increased by approximately 1 degree Celsius over the past century, a change that affects marine ecosystems, coral reefs, and the fish populations that depend on them.
Rising sea levels, projected to increase by 0.5 to 1 meter by 2100 under moderate warming scenarios, threaten coastal settlements, freshwater resources, and nesting beaches for sea turtles. Saltwater intrusion into coastal aquifers could render some springs and wells unusable, forcing communities to abandon traditional water sources. Storm surge associated with intense cyclones could inundate low-lying areas, a particular concern given that most of Socotra's population lives along the coast. For the endemic flora, climate change poses an existential threat. The dragon's blood trees, already showing poor regeneration, may be unable to adapt quickly enough to changing conditions. Their slow growth rate, reaching reproductive maturity only after decades, means that evolutionary adaptation through natural selection would require centuries. If conditions change too rapidly, the trees could face functional extinction, surviving as aging adults that produce no viable offspring, populations slowly dying out without replacement. Scientists studying Socotra's response to climate change have documented shifts in plant distributions. Some species that once grew only at higher elevations are now found at lower elevations as temperatures warm, while others appear to be contracting to ever smaller refugia. Phenological changes, alterations in the timing of flowering, fruiting, and other seasonal events, have been observed in some species, potentially creating mismatches between plants and their pollinators or seed dispersers, if different species respond to environmental cues at different rates.
The waters surrounding Socotra pulse with life. The island sits at the junction of several major ocean currents, where the East African coastal current, the South Equatorial current, and the Somali current converge, creating complex patterns of circulation that profoundly influence marine productivity. During the summer monsoon, powerful upwelling occurs along the Somali coast and around Socotra, bringing cold, nutrient-rich water from depths of 200 to 300 meters up to the sunlit surface zone. This upwelling fertilizes the ocean. Nutrients, primarily nitrates and phosphates that have accumulated in deep water from the decomposition of organic matter, suddenly become available to phytoplankton, the microscopic photosynthetic organisms that form the base of marine food webs. Phytoplankton populations explode, turning the water greenish and murky with their abundance. This bloom attracts zooplankton, tiny animals that graze on phytoplankton, which in turn attract small fish, which attract larger fish, and so on up the food chain to the apex predators, sharks, tuna, and marine mammals. The productivity generated by monsoon upwelling makes Socotran waters some of the richest fishing grounds in the western Indian Ocean. Tuna species, yellowfin, skipjack, and big-eye, follow the plankton blooms, congregating in dense schools that support both subsistence fishing by Socotras and commercial fishing by foreign fleets operating under licenses from the Yemeni government. The seasonal nature of this productivity means that fish populations fluctuate dramatically, abundant during and immediately after the monsoon, then declining as upwelling ceases and nutrient concentrations drop. Coral reefs fringe much of Socotra's coastline, particularly along the northern and eastern shores where calmer conditions prevail. These reefs, built by colonies of tiny coral polyps over thousands of years, create three-dimensional structures that provide habitat for an extraordinary diversity of marine life. More than 250 species of reef-building corals have been documented around Socotra, representing genera found throughout the Indo-Pacific region, but also including species with restricted distributions. What makes Socotran reefs particularly remarkable is their resilience. While coral reefs worldwide have suffered massive bleaching events, the expulsion of symbiotic algae caused by temperature stress, leaving corals white and often leading to death, Socotran reefs have shown unusual tolerance. During the 1998 global bleaching event, which killed up to 90% of corals in some Indian Ocean locations, Socotra's reefs experienced only modest bleaching with relatively low mortality. Similar resilience was observed during subsequent warming events in 2010 and 2016. Scientists hypothesize that this resilience results from pre-adaptation to temperature fluctuations. The monsoon-driven upwelling creates dramatic temperature swings. Water temperatures can drop from 29 degrees Celsius to 21 degrees Celsius within days when water temperatures cold well up, then warm rapidly when upwelling ceases and nutrient concentrations drop. Corals that survive in this environment must tolerate greater temperature variation than corals in more stable tropical waters. This tolerance appears to extend to warming trends. Corals accustomed to temperature fluctuations may be less sensitive to the relatively modest increases associated with climate change than corals from thermally stable environments. The genetic diversity of Socotran corals may also contribute to resistance. Preliminary genetic studies suggest that some Socotran coral populations contain genetic variants that confer heat tolerance, possibly through more efficient symbiotic algae or enhanced cellular stress responses. If confirmed, these heat-tolerant genotypes could be valuable for reef restoration efforts elsewhere, potentially providing genetic material for breeding or assisted evolution programs aimed at creating climate-resilient corals. The reef fish community displays the characteristic complexity of healthy Indo-Pacific reefs. Herbivores, such as surgeonfish, parrotfish, and rabbitfish, graze on algae, preventing algal overgrowth that would otherwise smother corals. These grazers are consumed by predators, groupers, snappers, and emperor fish that hunt along reef edges and in lagoon waters. Invertebrate predators, such as octopuses, moray eels, and triggerfish, hunt the numerous crustaceans, mollusks, and echinoderms that inhabit reef crevices. Among the reef's residents are several endemic fish species found only in Socotran waters. These include species of blennies, gobies, and damselfish, whose ancestors likely colonized the reefs when Socotra was less isolated, then evolved in isolation as sea levels fluctuated and gene flow with mainland populations ceased. Endemic status in marine species is relatively rare compared to terrestrial environments. Ocean currents facilitate larval dispersal over vast distances, homogenizing populations, which makes Socotra's endemic marine fauna particularly significant from a biogeographic perspective.
These lagoons showcase some of Socotra's most striking coastal scenery. Detwa Lagoon, on the island's western end, is backed by towering limestone cliffs and massive sand dunes that reach heights of 50 meters. The water in the lagoon is an almost surreal turquoise, its color created by sunlight scattering off fine carbonate sediments suspended in the shallow water. At low tide, extensive sandbars emerge, creating temporary islands of brilliant white sand surrounded by azure water, scenes that appear almost artificial in their perfection. The tide pools along Socotra's rocky shores are microcosms of marine diversity. When the tide recedes, water trapped in depressions becomes isolated, creating miniature ecosystems that must survive until the next high tide brings fresh seawater. These pools host sea anemones, their tentacles swaying gently in residual currents, hermit crabs negotiating the limited space, sea urchins wedged into crevices, their spines providing defense against predators, and small fish that take refuge from larger predators offshore. Socotra's beaches, particularly along the southern coast, are nesting sites for sea turtles. Green turtles and hawksbill turtles emerge at night during nesting season, the females hauling themselves laboriously up the beach to dig nests above the high tide line. Using their hind flippers, they excavate flask-shaped chambers in the sand, deposit 80 to 120 eggs, then carefully cover the nest before returning to the sea. The eggs incubate for approximately 60 days, their development rate dependent on sand temperature. When ready to hatch, the entire clutch emerges simultaneously, usually at night, and the hatchlings scramble toward the water, guided by light reflected off the water. This journey from nest to ocean is fraught with danger. Ghost crabs patrol the beach, snatching hatchlings in their claws. Seabirds circle overhead, waiting for dawn to reveal any hatchlings that emerge during daylight. In the water, predatory fish congregate near nesting beaches, aware the turtle hatchlings represent easy prey. Perhaps 1 in 1,000 hatchlings survives to adulthood, a mortality rate that seems catastrophic, but has been sustainable for millions of years of sea turtle evolution. However, modern pressures have tipped this balance. Artificial lighting from coastal development confuses hatchlings, which navigate by moonlight reflected on water. Lights from buildings draw them inland where they perish from dehydration or predation. Coastal erosion and sand extraction degrade nesting beaches. Plastic pollution in the ocean resembles jellyfish, a primary food for sea turtles, leading to ingestion of indigestible material that blocks digestive tracts. Fishing gear, particularly nets and long lines, causes thousands of sea turtle deaths annually through bycatch, incidental capture of non-target species. The intertidal zone, the area between low and high tide marks, supports specialized communities adapted to withstand alternating exposure to air and submersion in water. During low tide, these organisms must cope with desiccation, temperature extremes, and intense solar radiation. During high tide, they face wave action, predation by marine animals, and osmotic stress from immersion in salt water. Species that thrive here demonstrate remarkable physiological tolerance. Barnacles cement themselves permanently to rocks, filtering plankton from the water when submerged and sealing their shells shut when exposed to retain moisture. Limpets, conical snails, clamp their shells tightly against rock surfaces, creating watertight seals that prevent desiccation. Some species return to exactly the same location on the rock after each foraging excursion, and over time, their shells grind a perfectly matched depression in the rock's surface, improving the seal. Sea snails produce thick mucus that retains moisture around their bodies during low tide, and some species enter dormancy, dramatically slowing their metabolism until seawater returns. Incense routes and Indian traders, historical connections, and ancient commerce. Socotra's position at the crossroads of ancient maritime trade routes made it far more than an isolated outpost. The island served as a waypoint, resupply station, and trading hub along the routes that connected the Mediterranean world with India, Southeast Asia, and East Africa. The frankincense and myrrh trade, aromatic resins burned in temples and used in embalming, created networks of commerce that linked civilizations across the western Indian Ocean and Red Sea for more than 3 millennia. Although Socotra does not produce frankincense, that resin comes from boswellia trees found in Oman, Yemen's mainland, and Somalia. The island did export dragon's blood resin and high-quality aloe, both valued as medicines and dyes. More importantly, Socotra provided fresh water, provisions, and shelter for ships traversing the vast distances between Africa and India. Ancient sailors, lacking modern navigation instruments, relied on landmarks, and Socotra's distinctive profile, visible from great distances, served as a crucial waypoint. The Greeks knew Socotra. Diodorus Siculus, writing in the 1st century BCE, claimed that Alexander the Great's tutor, Aristotle, advised Alexander to capture the island because of its valuable aloe exports. Whether this story is historical or apocryphal remains debated, but it demonstrates that Greek awareness of Socotra extended back at least to the Hellenistic period. The name Dioscorida, used by Greek writers, may derive from Divipa Sukadara, Sanskrit for island of bliss, suggesting that Indian traders also frequented the island and possibly contributed to naming it. The Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, composed by an anonymous Greek-speaking Egyptian merchant around 50 CE, provides the most detailed ancient description of Socotra. The text describes the island as producing the highest quality aloe and dragon's blood resin, notes that it was inhabited by diverse populations including Arabs, Indians, and Greeks, and warns that the island lacks good harbors, making approach dangerous except during calm seasons. The Periplus was essentially an ancient sailing manual, offering practical information for merchants navigating Indian Ocean trade routes, and its mention of Socotra confirms the island's integration into these networks. Evidence of ancient trade appears in Hawk Cave's inscriptions. These texts, written in multiple languages over many centuries, revealed that sailors from distant regions visited Socotra and felt compelled to leave permanent records of their presence. The Greek inscriptions date primarily from the 1st to 3rd century CE, written by sailors who identified themselves by name and home city. Sanskrit inscriptions, somewhat later in date, demonstrate Indian presence. South Arabian scripts, including Sabaean and Hadramitic, ancient languages of Yemen, connect Socotra to mainland Arabian populations. Why did these travelers inscribe their names in caves? The practice may have had religious significance, in offering to local deities or protective spirits in exchange for safe passage. Alternatively, it may have been a simple assertion of presence, an ancient version of "I was here," motivated by the human impulse to leave traces of ourselves in remarkable places. Whatever the motivation, these inscriptions provide rare evidence of cultural contact in ancient times, demonstrating that Socotra was not unknown or avoided, but rather visited by literate cosmopolitan travelers from multiple civilizations. The trade in dragon's blood resin connected Socotra to distant markets. The resin was exported to ancient Egypt, where it was used in embalming processes and as a pigment. Roman physicians, including Dioscorides, whose name coincidentally resembles Dioscorida, described dragon's blood's medicinal properties in their pharmacological texts, indicating its availability in Roman markets. Chinese traditional medicine incorporated dragon's blood, though it's uncertain whether Socotran resin reached China directly, or if Chinese dragon's blood came from different plant species found in Southeast Asia. Medieval Arab geographers knew Socotra. Al-Masudi, writing in the 10th century CE, described the island and its inhabitants, noting their Christian faith, a detail that requires explanation. Christianity arrived in Socotra remarkably early, possibly as early as the 4th century CE, introduced by missionaries from the Church of the East, often called Nestorian Christianity, though this term is now considered inaccurate. For over a millennium, Socotra maintained a Christian population, their bishops appointed by the Patriarch based in Mesopotamia, their liturgy conducted in Syriac. This Socotran Christianity persisted long after Islam became dominant in the Arabian Peninsula and East Africa. Ibn Battuta, the famous Moroccan traveler, visited Socotra in 1331 and reported that the inhabitants were still Christian, though they were so isolated from the wider Christian world that their practices had become heterodox from the perspective of mainstream Christianity. He noted that they spoke Arabic poorly, their primary language being an indigenous tongue, almost certainly Socotri, and that they made their living through fishing and raising livestock. The Portuguese, during their 16th century expansion in the Indian Ocean, viewed Socotra strategically. In 1507, an expedition led by Tristan da Cunha conquered Socotra, hoping to establish it as a base from which to control Red Sea trade and prevent Ottoman expansion. The Portuguese built a fort at Souk on the northwestern coast and attempted to establish a permanent settlement. However, the harsh environment
limited resources, and persistent resistance from Socotri inhabitants made the occupation untenable. By 1511, the Portuguese abandoned their ambitions for Socotra, and the island returned to its relative isolation. After the Portuguese departure, Socotra fell under nominal control of the Mahra Sultanate, which ruled portions of southern Arabia, including Yemen's eastern regions. The Mahra Sultans exercised minimal actual authority over Socotra. The island was too remote, too poor, and too difficult to reach for effective governance. Socotris continued their traditional ways of life, largely autonomous, paying occasional tribute to the Mahra Sultan, but otherwise self-governing through customary clan structures. British interest in Socotra emerged in the 19th century as Britain sought to secure shipping routes to India. The opening of the Suez Canal in 1869 dramatically increased Red Sea traffic, making Socotra's strategic position more significant. In 1886, the Mahra Sultan, under British pressure, agreed to transfer Socotra to British protection. The island became part of the Aden Protectorate, administered from Yemen's southern coast, though the British did little beyond establishing a small coaling station and meteorological facility. During this British period, scientific exploration of Socotra intensified. The most significant was the 1880 expedition led by Professor Isaac Bailey Balfour of Edinburgh University. Balfour's team spent several months systematically surveying the island's flora, collecting specimens, and documenting species distributions. Their work revealed the extraordinary endemism of Socotran plants and brought international scientific attention to the island. Many Socotran species bear scientific names honoring Balfour or other members of his expedition, a tribute to their pioneering botanical work. Balfour's expedition's findings were published in lavishly illustrated volumes that included detailed botanical drawings and comprehensive species descriptions. These publications established Socotra's reputation as one of the world's most unique botanical localities and laid the foundation for all subsequent biological research on the island. Even today, scientists working on Socotra reference Balfour's collections and observations, testament to the thoroughness of 19th century scientific practice. After Britain withdrew from Aden in 1967, Socotra became part of independent South Yemen, a socialist state aligned with the Soviet Union. Soviet scientists conducted research on Socotra during this period, though their findings were not widely published in Western journals due to Cold War barriers. The socialist government attempted some development projects, building roads, establishing schools, introducing mechanized fishing, but Socotra remained marginal to South Yemen's priorities, which focused on the mainland. Yemen's reunification in 1990 brought Socotra into the unified Yemen, though again as a peripheral territory far from the capital Sana'a. The island's isolation protected it from the modernization and development that transformed other parts of Yemen, but also left it economically underdeveloped, lacking infrastructure and services available elsewhere. This isolation proved fortuitous from a conservation perspective. Socotra's ecosystems remained largely intact precisely because development was minimal. The UNESCO World Heritage designation in 2008 recognized Socotra's unique biodiversity and marked a turning point. International conservation organizations, development agencies, and researchers focused increased attention on the island. Tourism began to growing, carefully managed to avoid over-tourism that has damaged other World Heritage sites. Plans were developed for sustainable economic development that would benefit Socotris while protecting the ecosystems that make the island extraordinary. Then, in 2015, Yemen's civil war began, engulfing the country in conflict that continues to the present. Socotra, despite its remoteness, has not been entirely spared. The island has seen competing political factions, the Yemeni government, the Southern Transitional Council, the United Arab Emirates, vie for control on Socotra. In 2018, UAE military forces arrived on Socotra, nominally as part of the Saudi-led coalition supporting Yemen's government, but pursuing independent interests. This presence has created tensions with local populations and complicated conservation efforts. Despite political
threats, conservation, and an uncertain future. SOCOTRA stands at a crossroads. The ecosystem that evolved over 20 million years of isolation faces unprecedented pressures from multiple directions. Climate change altering the fundamental environmental conditions to which endemic species are adapted. Introduced species competing with or preying upon native species. Overgrazing degrading habitat. And political instability preventing effective conservation management. The next few decades will determine whether SOCOTRA's biological treasures survive or whether they join the growing list of ecosystems irreversibly degraded by human activity. Climate change poses perhaps the most insidious threat because it is pervasive and largely beyond local control. SOCOTRA cannot insulate itself from rising global temperatures, shifting precipitation patterns, or ocean acidification. The island's endemic species evolved under specific climatic conditions that are disappearing. The dragon's blood tree, adapted to capture fog moisture and withstand specific wind regimes, may find itself in an environment it cannot survive. The tree's current distribution already suggests climate sensitivity. It grows primarily at elevations between 300 and 1,500 meters, where fog frequency and temperature ranges fall within tolerable limits. Research by botanists studying dragon's blood tree populations has documented declining regeneration rates. Seedling establishment is failing in many locations, resulting in populations dominated by mature and aging trees, with few juveniles to replace them when they eventually die. The causes are multiple. Reduced fog frequency due to changing atmospheric patterns, browsing by goats that preferentially eat seedlings, soil compaction and degradation that prevents root establishment, and possibly genetic issues in small, isolated populations where inbreeding reduces fitness. The introduction of non-native species has disrupted SOCOTRA's ecosystems. Goats introduced by humans centuries or millennia ago have become super abundant, their populations no longer limited by predators that don't exist on the island. Goat grazing prevents woody plant regeneration. Seedlings are eaten before they can grow beyond the reach of browsing. This maintains open, degraded landscapes where endemic plants cannot recover. In some areas, goat trails have created erosion networks that channel rainfall runoff, accelerating soil loss and further degrading habitat. Cats, also introduced, prey heavily on endemic bird species, reptiles, and invertebrates. SOCOTRAN birds evolved without mammalian predators and lacked defensive behaviors against them, making them easy prey. The SOCOTRAN warbler, already rare and restricted to mountain habitats, is particularly vulnerable. Cat predation may be pushing this species toward extinction, eliminating one of the island's unique birds before effective control measures can be implemented. Invasive plant species, while currently limited on SOCOTRA compared to many oceanic islands, pose future threats. Prosopis juliflora, mesquite, an aggressive invasive shrub from the Americas, has been introduced in some coastal areas. This plant forms dense, impenetrable thickets that exclude native vegetation, alter fire regimes, and provide little value to native fauna. If Prosopis spreads widely on SOCOTRA, it could fundamentally transform lowland ecosystems, replacing diverse native plant communities with monocultures of a single invasive species. Infrastructure development, while bringing benefits to human residents, creates environmental impacts. Road construction fragments habitat, facilitates access to previously remote areas, and creates erosion problems. Poorly planned roads in the Haggar Mountains have damaged populations of endemic plants and increased soil erosion. Quarrying for road building material has scarred limestone landscapes, destroying habitat and creating visual blight in previously pristine areas. Tourism, though currently modest, carries risks. Uncontrolled tourist access to sensitive sites can damage fragile ecosystems through trampling, soil compaction, and disturbance to wildlife. Tourists sometimes collect endemic plants or shells as souvenirs, removing genetic diversity from small populations that can ill afford such losses. Poorly managed tourism infrastructure, hotels, restaurants, tour facilities, can generate waste, pollution, and demands for water and energy that strain the island's limited resources. However, tourism also offers opportunities. Ecotourism, properly managed, can generate economic incentives for conservation, providing local communities with income from preserving rather than degrading ecosystems. Revenue from tourism can fund conservation programs, support scientific research, and create employment that reduces pressure on natural resources. The challenge is finding the balance, enough tourism to generate benefits, but not so much that the tourism itself destroys what visitors come to see. The political situation complicates all conservation efforts. Yemen's ongoing conflict has disrupted governance, making it difficult to enforce environmental regulations, manage protected areas, or implement conservation programs. International conservation organizations, which have supported SOCOTRA's protection since the UNESCO designation, face challenges operating in a conflict zone. Funding is uncertain, access is difficult, and long-term planning is nearly impossible when the political situation remains fluid and unpredictable. Yet despite these challenges, conservation work continues. The Environment Protection Authority of SOCOTRA, though under-resourced, maintains a presence and attempts to enforce protections. Local communities, recognizing that their livelihoods depend on healthy ecosystems, support conservation initiatives. International NGOs work through remote partnerships, supporting SOCOTRA conservation practitioners and scientists who remain committed to protecting their island's unique heritage. One promising development is the growing involvement of SOCOTRA communities in conservation decision-making. Traditional knowledge systems, passed down through generations of herders, fishers, and plant collectors, contain sophisticated understanding of ecosystem dynamics. Elders know which areas regenerate quickly after grazing and which require long recovery periods. Fishers understand seasonal fish movements and spawning areas that should be protected. This knowledge, when integrated with scientific research, creates more effective and culturally appropriate conservation strategies. Community-based natural resource management programs attempt to give local people both authority and responsibility for conservation. Rather than imposing top-down regulations that local communities may resent or ignore, these programs recognize customary rights and work with traditional governance structures. For example, some herding communities have established rotational grazing systems where different areas are rested during critical regeneration periods, allowing vegetation to recover while still providing forage for livestock. Marine protected areas, established in several locations around SOCOTRA's coast, restrict fishing to allow depleted populations to recover. These areas were designated in consultation with fishing communities, identifying locations and seasonal closures that balance conservation needs with the livelihoods of fishers. Early results suggest these protections are working. Fish populations inside protected areas show higher abundance and larger average sizes than adjacent unprotected areas, and spillover effects provide enhanced catches in neighboring zones. Scientific research on SOCOTRA has accelerated in recent years, despite political challenges. Researchers from universities and conservation organizations worldwide collaborate with Yemeni scientists to study the island's ecology, document species distributions, assess conservation status, and develop management recommendations. This research fills critical knowledge gaps. For many endemic species, basic information about population sizes, reproductive biology, and ecological requirements is still lacking. Botanical surveys continue discovering new plant species. Dozens of species have been described scientifically only in the past 2 decades, and more await formal description. Each discovery adds to understanding of SOCOTRA's biological richness, but also emphasizes how much remains unknown. Some newly described species are known from only a handful of individuals at one location, making them critically endangered by definition. Their discovery triggers urgent conservation assessments and protection efforts. Genetic studies are revealing the evolutionary history of SOCOTRAN endemics. DNA analysis can determine when species diverged from mainland relatives, whether endemic species arose through single colonization events followed by diversification, or through multiple independent colonizations, and how much genetic diversity remains in current populations. This information is crucial for conservation. Species with very low genetic diversity may lack the evolutionary flexibility to adapt to changing conditions, while species with hidden genetic structure may require different management strategies for different populations. Captive breeding and seed banking provide insurance against extinction in the wild. Botanical gardens worldwide now grow Socotran endemics, maintaining populations outside the island as backup should wild populations collapse. Seed banks store seeds collected from wild plants under conditions that maintain viability for decades, preserving genetic diversity that can be used for future restoration. These ex-situ conservation measures are valuable safety nets, though they cannot replace thriving populations in their natural habitat. Restoration ecology offers hope for recovering degraded habitats. Experiments with replanting dragon's blood trees in areas where adult trees remain, but regeneration has failed, show promising results. Given protection from browsing and supplemental watering during establishment, seedlings can survive and grow. Limestone platforms degraded by overgrazing can be restored through controlled grazing, allowing native vegetation to return.
Island at the edge of time. Socotra rises from the Indian Ocean as a monument to isolation, evolution, and the strange beauty that emerges when life adapts to unique circumstances over millions of years. Here, in an archipelago torn from Africa by tectonic forces, life took paths unavailable elsewhere. Plants evolved forms that defy expectations, trees that bleed red resin, succulents that store water in bottle-shaped trunks, cucumbers that became trees, animals specialized to niches found only here, birds that exist on no other island, snails whose populations occupy single hillsides, geckos adapted to limestone cliffs and dragon's blood bark. The human inhabitants of this extraordinary place have, for 2,000 years or more, built cultures adapted to the island's rhythms. They speak a language found nowhere else, preserving an oral tradition knowledge systems accumulated across generations. They have harvested the island's resources, its resin, its fish, its grazing lands, without exhausting them, demonstrating that sustainable coexistence between humans and nature is possible when populations remain modest and practices remain traditional. Yet Socotra now faces its greatest challenges. The isolation that protected it for millions of years is breaking down. Climate change respects no island boundaries. Invasive species arrive with every ship and plane. Modern technologies and global markets create pressures that traditional systems were never designed to handle. The next century will reveal whether Socotra's unique heritage survives intact, becomes degraded but partially preserved, or disappears entirely, its endemic species joining the thousands that have gone extinct in the Anthropocene. The geologic record shows that islands are particularly vulnerable during periods of environmental change. When sea levels rise or fall, when climates shift, when new predators or competitors arrive, island species often lack the options available to mainland species. They cannot migrate to more suitable habitats because they're surrounded by ocean. They cannot interbreed with distant populations to introduce new genetic variation. They cannot hide in vast continental refugia until conditions improve. They must adapt in place or perish. Socotra's endemics evolved extraordinary adaptations to their specific environment, but that specialization becomes vulnerability when the environment changes faster than evolution can respond. The dragon's blood tree's umbrella canopy, so perfectly adapted to capture fog and resist monsoon winds, cannot be redesigned on ecological timescales if fog frequency drops or wind patterns shift. The Socotra starling's dependence on dragon's bloodberries creates cascading risk. If the trees decline, so does the bird.
Endemic snails occupying single hilltops cannot relocate if their microhabitat becomes unsuitable. These vulnerabilities make Socotra a bellwether, an early indicator of broader processes affecting biodiversity worldwide. What happens here over the coming decades will preview what may happen in other biodiversity hotspots facing similar pressures. If Socotra's endemics can be protected despite climate change, political instability, and development pressures, it offers hope that conservation can succeed even under challenging circumstances. If they cannot, it suggests that we have entered an era of biodiversity loss that will fundamentally impoverish Earth's biological heritage. Beyond its biological significance, Socotra represents something more difficult to quantify but equally important: a sense of wonder, of connection to deep time, of appreciation for the intricate beauty that evolution produces. Standing beneath a dragon's blood tree in the Dixon Plateau, watching evening light filter through its dense canopy, listening to the calls of Socotra sunbirds flitting between endemic shrubs, one confronts the realization that this scene exists nowhere else in the universe. This particular combination of geology, climate, evolutionary history, and biological community has produced something utterly unique. That uniqueness carries both privilege and responsibility. We are privileged to exist at a time when Socotra remains largely intact, when its wonders can still be witnessed and studied. We bear responsibility to ensure that future generations inherit not just stories and photographs of these wonders, but the living ecosystems themselves, still functioning, still evolving, still strange and beautiful. The Socotri people understand this in ways that outside observers can only partially grasp. Their language contains the island's knowledge: how to read the weather, when to fish, where water flows, which plants heal which ailments. Their songs preserve stories of ancestors who witnessed events now lost to written history. Their continued presence on Socotra provides the only plausible path for the island's long-term stewardship. Conservation cannot succeed if it treats people as problems to be managed rather than as partners essential to solutions. Socotra challenges simplistic narratives about nature and culture, wilderness and civilization. This is not an uninhabited wilderness. People have lived here for millennia, shaping the landscape through their herding, fishing, and plat harvesting. Yet neither is it a fully domesticated landscape. Vast areas remain where human influence is minimal, where ecosystems function according to their own logic, where endemic species thrive or struggle based on natural processes rather than human management. Perhaps the most important lesson Socotra offers is that life is resilient but not infinitely so. The endemic species here survived 20 million years of isolation, adapted to dramatic monsoon cycles, persisted through climate fluctuations from ice ages to interglacials. They demonstrate evolution's creative power and life's tenacity. But resilience has limits. There are thresholds beyond which ecosystems cannot recover, points of no return after which degradation becomes irreversible. We do not know precisely where those thresholds lie for Socotra's ecosystems, but we would be foolish to test them through neglect or indifference. The dragon's blood tree stands as Socotra's symbol. Ancient, strange, resilient yet vulnerable. Its umbrella canopy has withstood countless monsoons. Its roots have gripped limestone through the rise and fall of civilizations. Its crimson resin has flowed to seal wounds across generations. But the groves are aging, regeneration is failing, and climate change threatens to render their hard-won adaptations obsolete within decades. If the dragon's blood forests disappear, they will not return. Evolution cannot recreate millions of years of specialization within human lifetimes. But there is still time. The trees still stand, still bleed their red resin, still produce berries that Socotra starlings feed upon. The coral reefs still teem with endemic fish. The caves still harbor ancient inscriptions and blind spiders adapted to eternal darkness. The Socotri people still speak their ancient language, still know the stars that guide fishing boats home, still sing songs that echo across centuries. The question is not whether Socotra can be saved. The ecosystems remain fundamentally intact, the threats are understood, the solutions are technically feasible. The question is whether humanity collectively possesses the wisdom and will to prioritize long-term preservation over short-term exploitation, to recognize that some things, once lost, can never be recovered, and to accept responsibility for ensuring that this island at the edge of time continues its evolutionary journey. Socotra endures, for now, a fragment of Gondwana, a laboratory of evolution, a refuge for life found nowhere else. Whether it endures through the coming century depends on choices being made today, decisions that will determine not just the fate of one remarkable island, but the kind of world we choose to inhabit, one impoverished by the extinction of unique wonders, or one enriched by their preservation. The dragon's blood trees await our answer, bleeding their ancient resin into an uncertain future. Join us in documenting Earth's irreplaceable treasures before time and human action erase them forever.